For much of the 20th century, Venezuela stood as a beacon of prosperity and hope in South America, its fortunes built on the world's largest proven oil reserves. The discovery of oil in the early 20th century transformed the nation almost overnight, drawing global attention and investment. Oil wealth fueled a dramatic metamorphosis in Caracas, turning it into a vibrant, modern metropolis. Skyscrapers rose, highways sprawled, and a thriving middle class emerged, making Venezuela the envy of its neighbors and a symbol of modernity in the region. Yet, this newfound prosperity rested on a fragile foundation: a single resource. The economy became dangerously dependent on oil, while agriculture and manufacturing were neglected, leaving other sectors to wither. The elite, flush with easy oil money, saw little incentive to diversify. Their fortunes rose and fell with the volatile global oil market, binding the nation's fate to forces beyond its control. Beneath the glittering surface, deep social inequalities festered. While the oil boom enriched a privileged few, millions in rural villages and urban slums remained trapped in poverty, excluded from the nation's newfound wealth and opportunity. This widening gap between rich and poor fueled resentment and unrest, setting the stage for the rise of a charismatic leader who promised to upend the old order and redistribute Venezuela's vast oil wealth to those left behind. In 1999, Hugo Chavez, a former army officer, swept to power by channeling the frustrations of Venezuela's poor and promising a Bolivarian revolution. He rewrote the constitution, extended presidential terms, and nationalized key industries, consolidating his grip on power. Chavez launched ambitious social programs, funded by soaring oil prices, that delivered real benefits to the poor and cemented his popularity. But nationalizations and political appointments led to mismanagement, scaring off investment and undermining the economy's foundations. His confrontational foreign policy isolated Venezuela from Western partners, making it harder to access credit and technology. While hailed as a hero by some, Chavez's policies left the country dangerously exposed to future shocks. The Bolivarian Revolution's house of cards began to collapse in the mid-2010s, triggered by a dramatic crash in global oil prices. What had once seemed like a stable system, propped up by oil wealth, quickly unraveled as the country's main source of income dried up almost overnight. With government revenue almost entirely dependent on oil exports, Venezuela was plunged into a deep and unprecedented crisis. Years of chronic mismanagement, unchecked corruption, and neglect had already weakened the state oil company, PDVSA. When the crash hit, oil production plummeted by over 75%, leaving the government with almost nothing to fund essential services or imports. In a desperate attempt to keep the economy afloat, the government resorted to printing vast amounts of money. This reckless move unleashed a tidal wave of hyperinflation, rendering the bolívar almost worthless. People's life savings evaporated, and the cost of everyday goods soared beyond reach for most families. Supermarket shelves were stripped bare, hospitals ran out of vital medicines and supplies, and rolling blackouts became a grim part of daily life. The basic infrastructure that people relied on began to crumble, leaving millions in a state of uncertainty and fear. The vast majority of Venezuelans were thrust into poverty almost overnight, forced to endure daily struggles for food, clean water, and even the most basic necessities. Long lines for food and water became the new normal, and families were pushed to the brink of survival. The once wealthy nation descended into chaos, as public services collapsed and social order broke down. Protests erupted in the streets, and desperate citizens scavenged for anything they could find to get by. The economic unraveling devastated millions, shattering the fabric of Venezuelan society and leaving a legacy of hardship, loss, and uncertainty that continues to haunt the nation to this day. As hyperinflation and starvation took hold, millions of Venezuelans fled, creating one of the world's largest refugee crises. By the early 2020s, over 7 million people, about a quarter of the population, had left, most on foot to neighboring countries. Border nations like Colombia and Brazil were overwhelmed, as makeshift camps and humanitarian needs soared. Those who stayed faced a collapsed healthcare system, rampant malnutrition, and rising crime. Gangs controlled access to food and water, and treatable illnesses became death sentences. The stories of those who left are harrowing. Families torn apart, possessions sold for bus tickets, and new lives built amid discrimination and hardship. For many, leaving was the only hope for survival. The mass exodus stands as the most tragic consequence of Venezuela's collapse. As Venezuela's crisis deepened, the United States responded with sweeping sanctions, hoping to force President Nicolás Maduro from power and cut off the regime's vital sources of revenue. These measures were part of a broader strategy to isolate Maduro's government on the world stage and pressure him to step down. The sanctions banned U.S. companies from buying Venezuelan oil, froze billions in assets abroad, and targeted key officials. At the same time, Washington recognized opposition leader Juan Guaidó as Venezuela's legitimate interim president, hoping to spark a transition of power. The ultimate goal was regime change, but the sanctions had unintended consequences. Instead of weakening Maduro's grip, they accelerated Venezuela's economic collapse and deepened the country's humanitarian crisis, leaving millions struggling to survive. Oil exports, the backbone of Venezuela's economy, plummeted. Financial restrictions made it nearly impossible to import basic necessities like food and medicine, worsening shortages and fueling desperation among ordinary citizens. Rather than toppling Maduro, the sanctions handed him a powerful propaganda tool. He blamed the United States for Venezuela's suffering, using the crisis to rally his supporters and strengthen his hold on power. The mounting pressure united the regime's key pillars, especially the military, around Maduro, making them even more resistant to outside influence and internal dissent. Ultimately, the hardline U.S. approach failed to achieve its main objective. Maduro remained in power, and the opposition struggled to gain momentum. In the end, it was the Venezuelan people who bore the brunt of the economic war, facing hunger, poverty, and a daily fight for survival as the crisis dragged on. While the U.S. tightened sanctions, China quietly deepened its ties with Venezuela, offering billions in loans in exchange for oil. China's engagement began in the Chavez era, with oil for loans deals funding social programs and infrastructure. Unlike Western lenders, China demanded no political reforms, just reliable oil shipments. As Western companies pulled out, China became Venezuela's economic lifeline, buying discounted oil and building critical infrastructure. By the mid-2020s, Venezuela was deeply dependent on Beijing, sending most of its oil exports to China to service massive debts. Chinese firms operated key infrastructure, embedding themselves in the economy. China's patient, transactional approach gave it immense leverage, securing resources and influence as U.S. power waned. While Washington sought regime change, Beijing quietly built a web of dependency. Venezuela's crisis highlights the stark contrast between U.S. and Chinese foreign policy. The U.S. relied on hard power, sanctions, isolation, and pressure for quick regime change. This approach often backfires, fueling nationalist sentiment and inflicting suffering on ordinary people. China, by contrast, uses economic statecraft loans, investment, and non-interference, making governments dependent without demanding political change. China's long-term strategy creates enduring influence, turning client states into economic partners aligned with Beijing's interests. The U.S. seeks to change regimes from the outside. China co-opts them from within. In Venezuela, China's approach proved more effective, securing resources and influence while the U.S. lost ground. The battle for Venezuela became a test case for a new era of global competition. Venezuela is just one example of China's global strategy, echoing its ancient tribute system, building influence through economic dependency, not conquest. The Belt and Road Initiative extends this model worldwide, offering loans for infrastructure in resource-rich, cash-poor nations. Chinese companies build and operate these projects, while host countries accumulate massive debts. When countries struggle to repay, China gains strategic concessions, like ports in Sri Lanka or a military base in Djibouti. In Africa and Asia, Chinese loans have secured control over key sectors and resources. This debt-trap diplomacy allows China to expand its influence without firing a shot. Through patient, economically driven expansion, China is challenging the US-led order from the ground up. Venezuela's collapse is more than a national tragedy. It's a window into shifting global power. The US relied on sanctions and isolation, but failed to achieve its goals, deepening the crisis and losing influence. China, playing the long game, turned Venezuela into a dependent state, securing oil and strategic footholds in America's backyard. This outcome marks a strategic triumph for Beijing, achieved with less confrontation and more patience. The Venezuelan people paid the price for this great power rivalry. The lesson: in today's world, economic leverage can be more powerful than military might. As the US sticks to its old playbook, China is quietly building an empire of influence, one contract, loan, and port at a time.